honest and hardworking. But if that's all there was to it, a trained robot could do the job much better. What a civil servant must have is respect for ethical values, difference between right and wrong, compassion, fair-mindedness, giving credit where it's due, defending and standing by one's juniors when they make bona fide mistakes, not be yes men and given to unreasonable demands from one's bosses for the sake of a prime posting or a sinecure after retirement. These are attributes which a civil servant should try and cultivate. These are all covered in this book, and young officers who are just starting their service will find this book of immense value.
Anil has come out with another wonderful book which he has named Ethical Dilemmas That Face a Civil Servant. He has highlighted the problems which a civil servant is likely to face in his career and which will test him in various ways. But he has advised that you must stick to an ethical approach to life and in administration, because that is the only way of winning the confidence of the people. And if you have win the confidence of the people whom you are serving, half the task is done. This book is going to be useful for all those who are aspiring to get into the civil service, as it will make them familiar with the problems they will face. And it is also very useful to those who are already serving, because it will show them how such problems which Anil faced could be met and how he could succeed in his life as a career civil servant. What is essential is that you must stick to a principled approach. You must keep this principle in mind, that what matters is the welfare of the people you serve. And by showing this, Anil has in a way highlighted what should be the role of an ideal civil servant. Thank you.
A productive and purposeful career in public service has to be based on a good value system and on an uncompromising acceptance of ethical principles. Any person aspiring to serve the public through the civil services must read Anil Swarup's book, because it addresses conflicts and dilemmas and strengthens your ability and your resolve to address those as you go along.
Anil Swarup is to be congratulated and commended for this book. It's his second book on the civil servants, the backbone of our administration and governance of India. And in this book, he has covered a wide range of issues which civil servants face in terms of values, in terms of ethics, in terms of integrity, in terms of honesty. Indeed, those are the challenges which all of us face. But being from the civil service, he has first-hand experience of what civil servants go through, and it's a great contribution at this time especially. This book is not only relevant for civil servants, it's relevant for everybody, and particularly for young people.
Yes, so we are live. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to today's ISX webinar with three amazing panelists. We, of course, have Mr. Anil Swarup sir over here, who is very, very respected and somebody we hold in very, very high esteem. We have Abhishek Saraf. I'm sure you already all heard his name and know who he is. And we have Simi Karan as well. Again, somebody who is now going to be very popular in a household name. So, just to tell you a little more about our panelists today, allow me a couple of minutes to introduce everybody properly. And if I have not mentioned this already, I am extremely honored and privileged to have all of them today for today's webinar, and of course, to be anchoring the show and helping them out. So, we have Abhishek Saraf, as I told you, he's from Bhopal, IIT Kanpur batch of 2013. Straight away after graduating, went in for the IES and got selected. Abhishek is somebody who believes in getting selected and doing the best and getting where he needs to, no matter what. So his journey of civil services reflects just that. Gave his first attempt in 2015, not being very happy with himself, gave his second attempt in 2017, and guess what? Got selected. Ranked 402. Was not happy. Went again 2018, 248 IRS Customs, of course, selection again. Again, not very happy with himself. And he found his weaknesses and changed them into his strengths. This year, rank 8 IAS. What I really like about Abhishek's journey is that he stuck true to his strengths. His optional being civil engineering throughout, did not change it even once, and stuck true to his strengths. We have Simi Karan, somebody with a very, very special story, a story which I feel is a very good way to go about preparation. I'm sure both of them will tell you about their journey, both very contrasting journeys. Abhishek, somebody who tried till he succeeded and got where he wanted. Simi, who made sure that she was trying correctly in order to get selected straight away. So, first attempt, ranked 31. Born and brought up in Bhilai, she, of course, is somebody who has been academically strong throughout. CBSE 12th state topper, BTech from IIT Bombay, cracked her civil services in the very first attempt at a very young age of 22. AIR 31 with the optional of political science. She'll tell you more about her journey through the conversation today. We also have, as I told you already, our very, very respected speaker, Anil Swarup sir, who's a TED Talk speaker and a best-selling author. Various key positions held by Sir are Education Secretary, in which he did some influential and very, very prominent work, very, very special work. And of course, his very, very spoken about work as a Coal Secretary, among various other positions and postings Sir had throughout his career, all of which you can read about in his two books. As I told you, he's a best selling author of two books. The first book was Not Just a Civil Servant, and recently published by Unique Publishers, is Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant, a book for people from all walks of life. Yes, IAS aspirants to help understand the kind of dilemmas faced by civil servants, bureaucrats to understand how he himself in his journey dealt with those challenges, and of course, people from all walks of life who are looking for inspiration and also to understand the services better. So, without taking any further time from all of you today, I know you are not here to hear me, but the three panelists. So, over to Anil Swarup sir, and I hope you all have a really enjoyable and learning, knowledgeable session. So, just for the audience, a small little note. We will have a dedicated question period allotted towards the end of the session for roughly 20 minutes. What I request all of you very strongly is please note down your questions as the session progresses. There's no point putting it out in the comments, and ask them when we tell you to. So thank you so much. Swarup sir, over to you.
Thank you, Amrit. Thank you very much. What a pleasure it is to be amongst two youngsters who've done so very well. One who persevered and got into the civil service, and the other who made it on the first occasion itself. So welcome both of you to the fraternity of the civil servants, and all the best to all of you. Now, before you start shooting your questions to me with regard to how the service is all about, let me put you two in the hot seat and ask you a few questions. I'm sure you must have come across these questions while preparing for the civil service, but these will be different types of questions. So let me start with Simi. Simi, what inspired you to become a civil servant?
So, a lot of people start off their civil service dream right at the childhood. For me, the realization probably came late. So, I was in my second year when I had the opportunity to go for Vision India Foundation Public Policy Boot Camp, where I actually had the opportunity to hear Anil Swarup sir speak. The energy with which he came and the different roles that he spoke about, I think that was my first trigger point, so to speak. Moving on, I had a very great experience with teaching students at Abhashika, which is a student initiative at IIT Bombay, where we teach underprivileged children. Learning about their experiences, I realized that I want to pursue a career where I can actually reach more lives. And that's how in my final year, I ultimately decided to opt out of my placement and prepare for the civil services.
Oh, that's so gratifying to hear that I could contribute to you becoming a civil servant and could inspire you to become one. I'm so glad that you are a part of the civil service now. And to Abhishek, what inspired you to become a civil servant?
It was my nature, and I must point out that I'm naturally inquisitive. I like to learn new things. So when I went to IIT Kanpur to study civil engineering, I got immense exposure of civil engineering. But along with that, I was also involved in academics. I was doing research projects both in India and abroad. I was involved in organization of national level events. I organized a national level earthquake resisting design challenge back in college. So I got immense exposure to civil engineering, but I made a mistake in that period that I blindsided myself to every other form of knowledge. My interest in civil engineering served me well, and as was mentioned in my introduction, that I joined Indian Engineering Service, also known as the Engineering Service now. So when I joined the service during my training, I had the fortune of interacting with other professionals from various other services, some of whom were from civil services. So I had the opportunity to interact with IRTS officers, IRAS officers, IRPS officers. There I got the exposure and the realization that there is a much large world beyond the domain of civil engineering. And the world has a lot to offer you. You have a lot to learn. And what you learn can be applied across various domains, and you can contribute in a much more direct manner to the society compared to being a civil engineer. And that is when I started studying general studies under the supervision of my batchmates. Eventually, it got to a stage where I realized that I enjoy learning about general studies more than civil engineering. And that is when I decided to pursue civil services as a career.
Okay, so back to Simi. What were your major challenges when you started preparing for the civil service? You would be aware that a large number of aspirants to civil service would be watching this show. And if you were to advise them, how would you go about advising them about the challenges? First, you outline the challenges that they face. And second, how you manage to overcome those challenges to become a civil servant.
Thank you, sir, for the question. So I would describe my journey as an unconventional journey. I prepared in my final year. So the first dilemma that I faced was whether I should sit for the placements or not, because that would take up a lot of energy, a lot of time. So I ultimately decided to opt out of it. That was the first challenge that I faced. Second, because I was preparing parallel to my studies in my final year, I had taken up a lot of courses earlier so that I could have free time to prepare now. But again, because there's such a tough competition at IITs, I had to balance both my academics and my preparation. So that was the second challenge I faced. Thirdly, because the syllabus is so huge and I had so little time to prepare, I had to go about with a very well thought out strategy, a very well planned, in a very planned manner. So these were some of the challenges that I faced. Before going into my preparation, I would like to briefly tell about my background. In my 11th and 12th, my fourth subject was economics. So I have a very strong economics fundamentals. I'm a very avid reader. I've read books from Abhijit Banerjee, Esther Duflo, Amartya Sen, Guru Charan Das. So I'm a very avid reader. Also, I have taken up a minor in humanities and social sciences at IIT Bombay. Apart from that, I have been visiting various boot camps, various civil service policy practices that are happening. So I have a very strong background that was built before I dived into the preparation. I started formally preparing in my final year, that I could give a very full-fledged focus only from December onwards. That was in my last semester. That was because I had taken up a lot of courses earlier. But again, I had to strategize very well. So first advice that I would like to give would be, don't directly dive into the preparation, but build a background around it and use your college preparation, college time to build that. Secondly, while going into preparation, always go with a well thought out strategy. I always used to set like monthly goals, daily goals, and sometimes even hourly goals, so that my focus was not on perfection but on completion. Thirdly, as the quote goes, an intelligent person learns from others' mistakes. So I used to see a lot of toppers talks. I had the fortunate of listening to a lot of my seniors, discussing with them, so that I could learn from their mistakes and not repeat them in my preparation. Another thing that helped was I was using every minute of my time available. So I used to make e-notes on Evernote, and I used to read the e-paper, so that even if I have like a half-hour gap between my classes, I used to utilize that well. Also, because this was the final year, I had the added burden of like visiting all my friends' parties and farewells, because this is like after the placement period, so people are very relaxed. So even then, you have to go in with a very huge, strong dedication, commitment, and focus that the amount of time you are giving for the preparation will not be disturbed by anything else. So these are some of the things that I considered were useful for my preparation.
Very well said. Very well said, Simi. Pardon my being in the dark. There has been a bit of a load shedding here where I live. But I think you all can hear me out, though probably not see me. I'll become visible very soon. But what a wonderful answer. There are a few points that come out very clearly in the answer. One is that you were extremely focused, and that is why you didn't bother about going in for placement, and you focused in getting into the civil service. You didn't go in for placement, started preparing. The second part, which came out very beautifully, and I think could be good for aspirants who aspire to become civil servants, is that you utilized your free time very well. We all have a lot of free time, and you made the best of that free time. In fact, I have always been suggesting that it's the free time that's the time that you utilize the best, and those that do that succeed in life. So you made use of your free time. And finally, I think the point that you made is very valid in terms of planning and strategizing. That's also very important, because if you don't plan well, you will go hither, and you will not be able to achieve your goal. So I think these three points come out very clearly, and I think the aspirants will benefit out of what you told just now. I'll go back to Abhishek. Abhishek, what were the challenges that you faced, and how did you overcome them?
Thank you very much, sir. First of all, before I answer this question, I'd like to give a little bit of a background about myself. Like I mentioned that in college, I made a mistake that I blinded myself to every other form of knowledge. My tagline in college, before I joined railways, it was that engineering is the greatest form of knowledge, and civil engineering is the greatest form of engineering. There is nothing worth considering beyond this domain, and that was absolutely wrong of me. So what happened in college was, despite having all the opportunities to explore various aspects of my personality, I availed none of those. I was extremely focused on civil engineering, and it did pay me well. I got the opportunity to internship in India and abroad, and I cleared the engineering service exam in first attempt. And I was able to use civil engineering as an optional in civil service exam as well, throughout all my 4 attempts. So the challenges that I faced was that when I started preparing for civil service, I had absolutely zero background. Before I started preparation, my knowledge base was so limited that I used to think that the 6 rights mentioned in Article 19(1) are the only fundamental rights available to citizens. I once posed a question to my batchmates that what the Supreme Court has to do with the Constitution. This was my knowledge base with which I started preparing for civil service. And please note that, sir, I was already into training when I started preparing. So the training in railways is like from Monday to Friday, you're supposed to visit offices, you're supposed to visit fields. And during the weekend, you're supposed to travel. And sometimes you're supposed to travel even during the week, because you report to the zonal headquarters, then you report to the division headquarters, and then you're sent to the field. So there have been times when I was in 3 cities during the same day. So I could not carry books. I had very limited time, even limited energy. Still, and every aspirant knows that the initial phase is when you have the highest inertia. You don't have the knowledge base, you don't have the understanding of what to read, you're not able to figure out what is happening in the newspapers, you're not able to give direction to your preparation, and you're not in the cycle of prelims, mains, and interview. So you're not able to strategize very well. Besides, you have insecurities of yourself, that whether I'm going in the right direction, whether I have the aptitude for it, whether I'll make it or not, whether I have what it takes to clear civil service exam. That all was happening during my training, when there is inherent instability. So being able to keep myself motivated, that was challenge number 1. Second challenge was, as I mentioned, this was my 4th attempt, and I kept getting lower marks in essay. And essay is not something that comes inherently to people. It comes inherently to some, and to some it doesn't. So I struggled with that mythical word flow that you're supposed to maintain in the essay. I could never understand how to maintain flow and what to write in the essay. That was challenge number 2. The third challenge was dealing with failure. I mean, you think your paper has gone well, but you don't get the rank that you aspire for. Fortunately for me, I did appear in the list, so that was a motivating factor. But it does not happen so for every aspirant. So that mental health problem, the anxiety, the frustration that comes, that is another important challenge that one has to deal with. And also, the challenge was that you have to keep yourself motivated throughout the years of preparation. People start very, very, very strongly. They are very consistent, very strong, and very motivated. But after a month or two, this lack of, or after an attempt or two, this lack of. So keeping your motivation throughout the years, that was another challenge. And like Simi mentioned, I would like to add upon that point, using every minute. Like I mentioned, during the weekend, during my training in railways, you have to travel during the weekend. So there have been times when I have been studying in the train, and I can mention one incident as well. It was in Mumbai, the construction guest house of Central Railway. I was in construction training at that time, so we were given a triple-seated room, and two of my other roommates, my batchmates, were talking. So I could not concentrate on my studies. So I went to the bathroom, and the bathroom was spotless clean. It was a new guest house. It was spotless clean. So I sat on the commode and studied there for a while. I must say that it was spotless clean, very clean. I had motivation at that time, and I went to the bathroom and studied. So that kind of motivation, if you are able to summon, that is going to be a challenge. If you can summon that kind of motivation, you will come out with flying colors one day or the other. The problem that arises that people don't really realize why they want to go to civil service. And once they face failure, once they are not able to clear prelims, once they get poor marks in essays, their motivation slacks off. So I would advise the candidates to maintain consistency. And how do you maintain consistency? You introspect. You think, why do you actually want to go into service? And that motivation will be able to drive you out of any depression. Second is the advice that I would give to the candidates is that focus on mental health. Unfortunately, the way we are brought up in Indian society, we tend not to focus much on mental health. But a robust mental health free of stress, anxiety, frustration, depression, that is going to be extremely critical for any civil service aspirant. So develop a support system for yourself. Be very aware about it. Recognize your mental health status and address it. If you are into social media, oftentimes your batchmates, your friends, your peers will be posting things on social media that one batchmate of mine is in Australia, he's earning a package of 50 lakhs and see, I'm unemployed. I would humbly request every candidate to not do that, not indulge in that, because you are in the preparatory phase and they have completed their race. So you are an F1 car that is in the pit. You are in the repairing stage and they have completed their race. So do not compare yourself with them. Compare yourself with the other cars in the pit. Compare yourself with other people who are writing the test series. Don't use social media to demoralize yourself. That's all I have to say right now. Thank you.
Truly remarkable, Abhishek. Truly remarkable. And I hope the aspirants who are watching you, who heard you, have taken notes from you. I also took some notes, what you said. Remarkable example of perseverance. You repeated the point that Simi made about making use of the every moment that you have. I think the mental health part is very, very important. You have to have backup somewhere. And absolutely focused. And that is extremely, extremely important. And dealing with your failures. That will stand you in really good stead as you get into the civil service. You will come across many failures. And how you handle your mistakes and failures will make you an officer, good officer, or not so good an officer. But I'm so glad you said what you said. In both of you, I find makings of extremely, extremely committed civil servants who are going to contribute to civil society. With this, I hand you over the mic. Now I sit in the hot seat, and you can go ahead and ask about your apprehensions, your understandings, your impressions, your expectations of the civil service. Over to you, Abhishek and Simi. So I would ask Simi to take on first, and then probably we can reduce it into conversation. You can come in between. Yes, Simi, if you have a question for me, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, sir, for this opportunity. I would never have thought that I would have the opportunity of having a face-to-face interaction about such a big journey that I'm going to go ahead with. So thank you so much, sir. Sir, my first question to you would be, you were the coal secretary at one point, and you are well aware of the HC Gupta case. I would like you to explain a bit more about that situation, and for an honest officer who is trying to bring about an innovation, a solution, and he might go wrong sometimes. What are the kind of challenges that he might think of before going for that decision and after going for the decision?
I don't think you've had the occasion to read my latest book, Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant. There's a full chapter in it, and it is at two levels that I have tried to explain that. One, there are occasions when civil servants do get caught in political crossfire, meaning thereby that there's a particular party ruling now and the party changes and they start taking action against the previous actions that have been taken. And more often than not, it's not the politician, it's the civil servant who gets caught. So one chapter is dedicated to what should a civil servant do not to get caught in political crossfire. I have clearly explained how it can be done because I've been in positions where I could have got caught in political crossfire. Before I became Home Secretary, I was heading project monitoring group in the Cabinet Secretariat at a time when all scams were breaking out. And my job was to fast track projects at a time when no one was prepared to take a decision. And during that period of 15 months, we got clearance of 5 lakh crores worth of project and not a finger was raised. Same happened in the coal sector where there was total mess and we tried to clear the mess with no one pointing a finger to us. How was it different from what happened before that? Simple. It's not very difficult. It's doable and it's simple. Number one, whatever you do, keep it extremely transparent, meaning thereby that decisions should not be hidden. It should be put as early as possible in public domain. Once that happens, malafide will never be active. The problem arose in the previous cases, irrespective of who was at fault, because I've tried to explain that Mr. Harish Gupta was not really at fault, but by some manipulation, he got caught in that political crossfire. Now imagine a scenario, had the decisions that were taken then been put in public domain, even if the decision was wrong, and mind you, when you take decisions, there will be occasions where you commit mistakes and take wrong decisions. So what will prevent you, or what will save you finally, is your honesty in terms of laying bare what you've done. And today, technology allows you to do that. Till about 20 years ago, it would have been difficult. Today, you can actually create a portal and put every decision there. Now, let me confess to you, when we did coal block auction, which came to be appreciated world over, we did commit mistakes. But the mistake was detected the moment I put it on the portal. Some people pointed out, sir, this is not correct. And secondly, in the press conferences that I used to have on the following day, I would start by admitting my mistake. So once malafide is not attributed, because no matter how much you try, mistakes will become. So how do you go? Number two, you must clearly know your rules and regulations. It's very clear. If you're not aware of rules, then no matter how honest you are, you can get caught. Now, knowing rules does not mean that you don't do the right thing, because sometimes rule clearly does not give very clear directive. So there are blacks and whites. In case the rule clearly says that you should not do that, under no set of circumstances you should do that. But there are gray areas. When you are interpreting a rule in favor of somebody, then give a good reason so that you can defend subsequently. Now, there's another chapter in my book in which I talk about supporting or extending a scheme to brick kiln workers. Now, technically speaking, brick kiln workers are not building workers, but they are the most exploited lot. Now, some of the officers in my department, I was Director General Labour Welfare, interpreted it strictly and said, sir, if you treat brick kiln workers as building construction workers, then steel makers would also become building construction workers. Then I examined it on the file, gave a reason why I am treating them. And my rationale was as follows, that the value add that comes through the brick kiln workers is much more than the value add that comes from a steel worker. Because there the value add through manual labor or intervention of labor is not as much as in bricks. Because brick, the entire value gets created by the man. And that has stood the test of time. This decision I took way back 12 years ago, and no one has questioned me. So, number one, know your rules and regulations very well. Number two, use technology and make your decision transparent. My suggestion would be, if you do that, I don't think there's trouble for you. Because some of the officers hide behind honesty and don't take decisions. That's worse. Because we are paid not merely to be honest, we are paid to deliver it on the ground. So I hope I have answered your question.
Thank you, sir. I think today technology is offering us lots of opportunities to be more transparent, and you effectively utilize it.
Just to add, transparency and technology can be your savior. Use it to the hilt.
Right. The next question would be, when we are going right at the grassroots level, we see that there are lots of departments, and oftentimes they work in silos. How as a probably as a collector or someone at a lower level than a collector, how do you bring all of that together? How do you bring that interagency coordination that we often quote in our answers, but I have no clue how that happens practically, so that we can bring about a solution?
See, the officers that are successful are able to build teams. And how do you build teams? By trusting people, by conveying the value proposition to whoever you're talking. So suppose I have to do some work which involves two departments. I would first individually talk to them and convey to them that if you cooperate with Department X, you will stand to. Similarly, I talk to Department X and tell them if you work along with Department Y, you will stand to benefit. You have to convey a value proposition to both of them. Normally, what we do is we issue a mandate. We say this is the government order and you got to do it. Okay, government order is there. But whether the ownership of that order is there in the team or not, that will apply everywhere. The advantage that the IS has is that you are put in a position where you can actually get in coordination. For others, it's slightly more difficult. But as collectors or subdivision magistrate, you have that inherent authority. But don't use that authority as authority. You become a facilitator using that authority if you can bring people together. So multiplicity of not only two, you can get 10 of them together. But you have to strategize as you did in case of preparing for the civil service as to what should I tell him, when should I tell him, where should I tell him. So the fundamental thing is not only in the meeting. You may have to indulge in a bilateral dialogue with them to settle certain ruffled feathers, or maybe trying to explain. If you want to convince somebody, one-on-one is the best way to convince. It's a bit time-consuming, but I can assure you that once you get the confidence of people around you, then you don't have to do much. As I discovered in the whole ministry, I was coordinating with Ministry of Environment, Forest, Railways, every other ministry. I started 24/7. I used to sleep in the office. It was such a crisis. At the end of 2 years, I had only 45 minutes of work because everyone had taken over his job. Now, once you can create that environment, and it won't happen just like that, it takes time to build that. Once you establish your credentials and do that, there's not much of a problem. Can we go to Abhishek for his question?
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, my first question is that was there ever a point in your career that at that point when you thought that you would be better, you would be able to contribute better in NGO rather than being an IS officer?
Never. I always felt that as an IS officer, you can contribute so much that no other service in the world gives you that opportunity of contributing as much as you can do at IS. At no point in time did I think that. Yes, there were frustrations. That was a different matter. Frustrations there everywhere. I was very frustrated on some occasions. In fact, in some cases, I was so frustrated that the poet in me came out. But I continue to believe that if I can't do it as an IS officer, I don't think anyone else can do it. Because I have the advantages which no other service has.
So my second question is that was there ever a point in your service where you had taken a decision that was ethical as well as legal, but it was against your own moral standards?
To me, moral standards determine my ethics. There was never a contradiction between my moral standards, my value system, and ethics. To me, as I define ethics in my book also, is a personal way of looking at it. And there was never a contradiction between what I felt and what I did. So I was prepared to face those consequences. There was conflict in between. That was of a different nature. I was not sure what should I do. My ethical values thought this is the right thing. But the pressure was to do something else. Of course, I followed my conscience and I followed my values. But there was that dilemma. And as I write in my book, Ethical Dilemmas of the Civil Servant, to begin with, there was that dilemma that I faced. So the dilemmas continued to exist as I grew in service. But in my mind, the dilemma ceased to exist because over a period of time, it became very clear in my mind, what will I do and what. There was no confusion. Initially, yes, there was. If you look at the initial chapters of my book where I have narrated incidents in Hardoi and Lakhimpur Kheri, yes. And I have left certain questions unanswered at the end of the chapters because I was not clear. In some cases, I'm still not clear. But now, as I went along in the service, clarity comes to your mind. Once you are prepared to face the consequences of what you're doing, then there's no problem. It is when you are apprehensive of consequences and you don't know what to do. Once that becomes clear, once it became clear to me that transfer is no punishment, I will be able to take that on. Life became very easy for me. I mean, you don't have to be, you don't have to be abrasive, but you can politely tell your point of view. If they disagree with you, you're out. So be it. That's how life is.
So my next question is that
Yes.
could you please narrate an example of an honest politician, so to speak, that you enjoyed working with, that you got an opportunity to learn from, and you cherish the time with them?
Oh, I learned a lot while working with Mr. Kalyan Singh, and I must narrate an incident with you. It's a small incident, but it reflects how I learned. And I mean, normally when most of us get into service, we have very negative thoughts about politics. But I had the fortune of having excellent politicians. Honesty is a personal attribute, ethics is a personal attribute, but my perception of them was very positive. They wanted to do. I was fortunate. Of course, there were other politicians also which made life difficult for me. Mr. Kalyan Singh, I was his special secretary and then his secretary also. I remember I had just taken over and we were having a conversation early in the morning. And Mr. Kalyan Singh was very agitated, very agitated. He was agitated because there 2 days down the line, he had 7 election meetings. There was a by-election happening in Tawa. And there were 7 election meetings and he was very agitated. He was not well. He said, how can I attend? How can I address 7 rallies? I can address only 5 of them. And I was just bystander at that point in time because the chief secretary and DCP were also there, and both were shaking their heads, agreeing with him. Sir, how can you do 7 meetings? Now, the dilemma that I faced was this is not directly related to me. This is absolutely a political option of his. He has to take a call. Should I speak or not speak? But the values in me told me that probably he's not doing the right thing because I had been district magistrate a few months ago. So I could hold myself when I told Mr. Kalyan Singh, sir, I was district magistrate a few days ago, a few months ago. And when Chief Minister comes to the district, there's a lot of excitement, anticipation, expectation. So even if you don't speak, you should go there for a while, say namaskar, and then you can come back. He looked at me very angrily and he said, do you think I can, it was in Hindi, aap samajhte hain ki main kar paunga? Now, as he said that, the chief secretary started nudging me to keep quiet, but I didn't. My reply was, sir, mera kaam aapko apni raay dena hai. You have to take a call whether you want to go or not. That's what I felt. And the chief secretary started nudging me even harder when I spoke. There was pin drop silence after that. After 10-15 seconds, Kalyan Singh ji looked towards me and said, Anil ji, aap theek kehte hain. The moment he said, Anil ji, aap theek kehte hain, the chief secretary immediately stopped nudging me and nodded again. Sir, haan, bilkul sahi kehta. Now, for me, I had forgotten it. When Mr. Kalyan Singh became chief minister once again, second time, and everyone was meeting him, I didn't go to meet him. When it was 3 days over, he rang me up, he said, Anil ji, aap milne nahi aaye mujhse. So I told him, sir, aap abhi abhi chief minister bane, maine socha, jab aap thoda aaram se ho jayenge, nahi, nahi, aap turant aaiye. So I met him. He tells me that main aapko apna sachiv banana chahta hu. Maine kaha, aapka nirnay hai, it's your decision. Aap ye nahi janna chahenge, main kyun banana chahta hu? Maine kaha, bataiye banana chahta hu. Then he narrated this incident which I narrated. So here was an honest, I'll give you another instance what happened. I got a message from District Magistrate Aligarh. That's there in my book also. That the vehicle of CDO had been commandeered by the son of the Chief Minister, Rajveer Singh. He had taken his vehicle. Now this was nothing unusual in UP, because but Kalyan Singh is Kalyan Singh. Now he conveyed this to me, the District Magistrate, who was my batch. So I was waiting for him. We were supposed to go to an event. I was to accompany. So he came out dot on time. He was very punctual. And we started traveling by car. Those days we didn't have mobile phone. So as I was briefing him about the media because of the DPR, I also mentioned to him, sir, I got this message from DN that the vehicle of CDO has been taken by your son. Now he immediately got the car key to go back to the place. I didn't know what had happened. We came back. He rang up his son, gave him a good dressing down. I was sitting in another room. And by the evening, the car was back. And this guy comes out again, sits in the car, goes to the meeting, apologizes for the delay because he never late. And it was business as usual. So he was a guy who was so particular about small things. And there are many such instances which I have given. So he was not the only person that I enjoyed working with. I had the pleasure of working with Mr. Mallikarjun Kharge, with Mr. Prakash Javadekar, all these very fine politicians. I mean, each politician has his own limitations. You must understand that no one is perfect. But by and large, I enjoyed them. But there were others who were real rascals. It takes all types to make this world, whether it's in the civil service or in the politics.
May I go ahead, sir?
Yes, you can ask another, then we'll go to Simi again before we open the questions. Perhaps.
Sir, my question is regarding, do we even need IS? Because, police service, you can understand it's a sovereign function, internal security as well as law and order. Every country has a police service in some form or the other. Regarding the foreign service, yes, we need diplomats. International relations are run by diplomats mainly. Same goes for revenue service. But if you look internationally, you go to US, you see there is a special executive service, but it is not an exact analog of IS because the head of departments are oftentimes PhDs and appointed directly by politicians. In Japan, you can see there is an elite bureaucracy, but it is much smaller in predominance compared to IS. But in India, we have IS officers who are occupying critical positions right from the start. And in the ministry, there are joint secretaries and secretaries. The secretarial positions and joint secretary positions are predominantly occupied by IS officers. My question is that is IS the only way to go for the development of the country? Is it that critical, or can we envision another model?
No, you can think of any other model. I mean, one should be innovative enough to think models. But the advantage that the IS has is the amount of experience that you gain in the field enables you to become a good human being manager. Ultimately it boils down to managing men and women. There is a whole debate about generalist and specialist. And I keep arguing that I'm not bothered about generalist specialist. I am more bothered about the person sitting there is able to manage men and women. That's the expertise that is required. And in fact, I tweeted today that you can outsource expertise, but you can't outsource attitude. So if you can own those qualities of leadership, if you are able to get work from men and women, that's what is required. And I'm not saying a specialist can't do it. The IS has an advantage because that's the job he does right from the beginning. Because right from the beginning, you are not a specialist, and I'm so glad that we don't specialize in a particular area, and I argue for that. The only specialization that you should have is to be able to manage men and women and get things moved on the ground. Because you'd always find a specialist to do it. So, for example, when I was coal secretary, I didn't know anything about coal sector. In fact, when I got posted as coal secretary, I rang up a friend of mine. Yaar, sector kaisa hai? He said, gang sabha se kuch dekhiye kya. So that was the final response to how. But one managed to do it. Why I did it? Because I was not interfering in the technology part of it, in the specialization part of it. We saw to it that we got a good officer as chairman Coal India, then allowed him to work. Now, if I were a specialist in coal mining or something, I would have been poking my nose into Coal India. What we did was, we defined the domains. I said, Coal India would go into the digging part of it, and I managed the environment part of it. But that was my forte. I could manage the environment in the sense, manage various ministries, go to states, discuss with them. No one else could have been able to. Imagine a specialist sitting as coal secretary. Who's going to listen to him if he goes to a state and discusses with chief secretary? Just because I was in the service, you have your colleagues sitting there, you can talk to them, pick up a phone and do it. That needs to be leveraged. When I talk to phase 5 officers, I tell them that the advantage, if you don't use that, if you don't leverage your connections for your official work and live in silos and say that I am the best one around. In a chapter in my book I have written that, though of course people like you also get selected, but I've said this, there is some problem with the selection process. We are not selecting leaders. We are selecting people who are able to write down at this point in time. So they're good communicators. They may not necessarily be good leaders. And you do find that in the civil service, some very bright people are bright individuals, not bright leaders. They're not group people. You've got to take everyone along. So that's there. I think we'll go to Simi just now, because otherwise we'll run out of time for questions from others who are attending this. Yes, Simi, if you have any questions, you can ask.
One last question. Like, if we see the process of promotions and postings, etc., they depend upon our ACR, the performance report that is given to us. Versus there's the aspect of the public spiritedness and the working in the field that we're actually doing. So, are they, in your personal opinion, are they in tandem, or is there a difference between them, and how do you resolve this difference going forward?
Simi, I would disappoint you when I say that there's no connect between the ACR and your performance. But having said that, I don't think you should be working for that. As you go along in service as I did, it's not that I was oblivious of ACRs and oblivious of promotion. Yes, I was concerned, but I was more concerned about what I was doing. I mean, again, I would suggest when you read my book, you'll find that I was looking at the kick that I was getting out of doing what I was doing. Once you start enjoying your moments, there are people over whom you have no control. Do you have any control over your boss? Do you have any control over the manner in which ACR is formulated? Do you have any control over the disconnect that exists between ACR and you don't? So I have often advised people, focus totally on what you have control over. Because you have absolutely no control over others. You have control over yourself. And that is where my book ends with this couplet. खुद ही कुकर बुलंद इतना, खुद ही कुकर बुलंद इतना कि हर तकदीर से पहले खुदा बंदे से कुछ पूछे बताते खुदा क्या है. You don't have to go to anywhere else. Because we live in a society where we say karmanyavadikar but we don't seem to believe in it. We are so obsessed with results. But if you can somehow dissociate yourself with results and focus on task at hand, which you did while entering into civil service. Of course, you had a target like Arjun, but you were not obsessed with it. You are focused on what you are doing to achieve that. So you're moving in that direction. As a civil servant, that's what I've been advising. Enjoy the moments that you are in. And for heaven's sake, don't try and become a revolutionary. That's another advice I give. Because if you wanted to be a revolutionary, pick up a jhadu and join a political party. You are in civil service, there is a discipline within which you have to exist. But within that discipline, you can do a lot. And the final couplet or final phrase that I use is borrowed from Reinhold Niebuhr. Lord, grant me the serenity to accept things I cannot change, courage to change things that I can, and the wisdom to understand the difference between the two. I think this conversation can carry on. I'm enjoying this conversation with the two of you, the youngsters looking into the service. But I think I'll have to bring in Amrit so that there are a number of questions that are coming up in the chat box, and he will then be throwing questions to you or to me. Over to you, Amrit. Are you around?
Yes, I'm back, sir. Good evening.
Yes.
So it was very insightful and interesting for me also to keep hearing all of your views and comments throughout, especially, sir, yours. So before we move on to the question answer round, I had a small suggestion to make, sir. Abhishek, we could start with you and move on to Simi, and you could speak 5 minutes about your preparation in depth. Just a very in depth, I say yes, but briefly within the 5 minute, keeping the positive time in mind.
Yeah, sure. So I would get right to it. Like I mentioned that I had a very limited or virtually non-existent knowledge base when I got into preparation. So I devoted first few months of my preparation to just reading and developing familiarity with the topics and developing a kind of aptitude to be able to understand the things that were part of syllabus and that was being reported in the news. So that point of time, you could say that I was not very well strategizing my content, but because I had no content to begin with. So that was going on with my training in Indian Railways. So that time was my incubation period, so to speak. Like Simi mentioned that you have to have she was an avid reader and she developed a knowledge base for it. So that kind of preparation went on till 2015 and I could not clear the first prelims. I was very well underprepared and I missed the margin by 16 marks actually. It was a huge margin. And now I would delve into, so I was a little bit conscious that I'm spending way too much time creating a background or preparing a foundation, but that is something I would advise to every candidate. Because you have to have a base. It is not a one in, one out exam that you learn something and you reproduce it directly. You have to have an understanding, you have to have an aptitude. For that, you have to be well read. That's point number one. Point number two is coming to the prelims strategy. I personally did not use any coaching term material that comes XYZ material covering the events of entire year. I did not believe in that. I believed in making my own notes. And I made those notes on Evernote. And yes, if I'm speaking about prelims, I must mention that my personal opinion is that the preparation for prelims goes on throughout the year, but separately from mains. You have to make your separate notes for prelims. You have to develop an understanding of what kind of questions are asked in the prelims. You can review the previous year's papers. So when you are reading the newspaper, you should have an eye out for the facts that can be put up in prelims as questions directly. That's first. And then I use websites. There are several famous websites that one can follow. The daily current affairs are posted on those websites. I also made it a point to complete 6,000 questions per year for preparation for prelims throughout the year. So how I did that was I referred to one coaching test series before the prelims. I did the 60-day plan that comes on a website. that comes on one particular website. Everybody knows the name. So I did the 60-day plan for the preparation of prelims. And then I used to do 15 questions every day from 3 websites, five questions each on every website. And I used to make notes of whatever question I got wrong, 1 line note for every question I got wrong. So the cumulative effort was that I could complete 6,000 questions, objective questions in my preparation for prelims. And I was making my notes, as I mentioned. I used to revise those notes before the exam, like a couple of months before the exam. And I followed the conventional book list, nothing different about it. You don't have to innovate for prelims except the things that I just told. That was all the innovation I did. I made the notes separately, like prelims GS1, it has ancient history, modern history, medieval history, culture, all the things that are appearing in current affairs. Then GS2, it had government schemes and international relations, polity, and all those things that were appearing in the news. Similar for GS3.
I had a quick question in the middle, Abhishek. Could you also, just dwell on what differentiates the prelims and mains notes?
Yeah, very much so. I think the requirement of the exam for prelims and mains is very different. You can read the same book, but you have to read it differently for prelims and for mains. You can read the Rajiv Bhai spectrum, but when you are reading the book for prelims, you have to focus on facts. And when you are reading it for mains, you have to focus on the analytical content of it. You have to use those facts to support your analytical content. But for prelims, you have to focus on those very facts, because either you know the fact or you don't know the fact in the exam. But in mains, you have the freedom to support your argument by various number of facts. You might know some facts, you might not know the other facts. So the approach to reading the same book becomes different.
Okay.
So as I was continuing, I finished the prelims part. Now in the mains, what I did different was I made my own notes. One. Second, I used data liberally. The conventional wisdom says that you can write qualitative answers and you don't have to use data. I did not buy that. I use data, and the 4 of us are discussing here. If I present qualitative facts about MSME sector, or if I say that it has 35% contribution to GDP, 11 crores jobs, and 40% manufacturing, 44% export, 25% investment, 80% land, 80% jobs, and 50% job, 80% job, 50% land, and 6% credit to the sector, it creates an impact. You have the qualitative aspect and the quantitative aspect. Second, I made a blunder in attempting the GS mains paper. I attempted question number 11 first, 10 to 20, and then from 1 to 10. The thing that goes wrong is that you are answering the first question that the examiner is going to see in the last hour. So your writing, presentation, everything is going downhill from question number 1 to 10.
Got it.
That creates a very bad impression in the eyes of the examiner. Imagine the person is taking the last copy of the tape, and that copy happens to be yours. And as soon as he or she opens the copy, there is some bad handwriting, degrading presentation, as well as not haphazardly presented points. So your marks goes down. This year, what I did was I opened the copy, started writing, no prioritization, nothing. 7 minutes for each 10-marker question, and 11 minutes for each 15-marker question. That's it. No prioritization. If I'm spending my time equitably, why do I need to prioritize? And my blunder in 2017 and 18 was the essay paper. That is what kept me from being an IS officer right in the 2017 attempt. I got 105 marks. I got frustrated and I joined a coaching class. It backfired and I got 79 marks in 2018. So I decided not to go for any coaching. I got my friend's advice, Mr. Shubhanshu Jain. He's an IPS officer. He scored 130 marks in 2018 paper in essay. And his input was so critical that I probably have improved my performance in essay. So what I would like to summarize about the essay paper is that it is not about your knowledge, period. It is not about your knowledge. I had mucked up so much facts. I had so much content that what I did in 2018 was too much information and my essay became lopsided. I could not cover all the perspectives. Essay paper is not about your knowledge, it is about your perspectives. You can use your knowledge to substantiate your perspective, but the diversity of perspectives is absolutely critical. This year I wrote the essay that better for individual is not better for the society, that topic. So what I did was I showed how better for individual is better for society. How is it not? And when is it not? So why is it not? If it is not better, so why is it not better? And what can we do to make it better? And what kind of future can we envision if we are able to achieve this better for individual is better for society? So these are the perspectives, and that is how I maintain the flow of my essay. And that is something I have Mr. Shubhanshu Jain to thank for. And coming to the interview part, sir, I think that my approach, if I must summarize it, my approach was that in my detailed application form, I should be more knowledgeable than the board. I should be able to tell them something that they didn't know. As soon as I do that, as soon as I relate it with my lived experiences, they're going to think that this person stands out. And I must say that from empirical evidence, I got 150 marks out of 200 in engineering service exam and 193 marks in both my interviews in 2017 and 2018. My approach was that in my DAC, I have to be the expert. In general studies, I can do something or the other with the content, but in my TAF, I have to know more than the whole. That was it.
So wonderful. Thank you, Abhishek, for sharing your journey in a very brief capsule.
Thank you,
So,
sir.
three things, if I may highlight what I understood and which I really appreciate in your journey, and something I also always believe in very strongly, are number one, your focus on practice and regular practice in order to be able to translate your knowledge into marks. That is very important, and I really appreciate that you did that correctly. And second, another thing which I really have a lot of belief in, and you've substantiated as well, is presentation, as to how well you're being able to impress the examiner. Because at the end of the day, examiner is also a human being who's checking several copies, and it's a comparative analysis that is a human nature that will arise. So that is another very valuable point you raised. Yes, please, Abhishek.
I just like to add one more thing, like you said about presentation. If a rule of thumb is something that the candidate can go by while writing the answers, the less you frustrate the examiner with your copy, the more
Yes.
marks you will get.
Yes,
It's
I
as simple
complete.
as that.
I couldn't agree more. And just that is the third point which I understood from what you've said. Again, something I really believe in. So I really enjoyed listening to you. Is communication, the effective communication. It's not about just holding the facts and the figures and all the knowledge in the world. My dear friends, let me tell you one thing. I've interacted with a lot of aspirants, and I can surely say that almost every aspirant holds a lot of knowledge. They're very knowledgeable people, they're very well read. Even the ones who don't succeed, they're very knowledgeable individuals. And I respect them for that. I think the only difference that comes in is how effectively they're being able to communicate that knowledge in a manner that the examination is able to decipher it. The examiner is able to decipher it and give you marks for it. They cannot get frustrated, as Abhishek is correctly saying. So, Simi, moving on to you. Yes, Abhishek, sorry, Simi, just 1 second. We'll go back to Abhishek. He has a small
Sorry,
point to
Simi,
make.
just 1 point.
Yes, please.
Now the conventional wisdom stated that for 10 marker you have to write 10 points. For 15 marker question you have to write 15 points. But I had enough knowledge to write 15 points for 10 marker question and 21 to 22 points for 15 marker question. So I did that. But the thing that went wrong with me in 2018 was that I did not have space left to write conclusion.
Okay.
That was what happened with my answers. So in 2019 attempt, when I reached the last page of my answer, I would draw a small dash, earmarking the space for conclusion, that whatever happens, however many points I've written, I will not intrude into this space. This space is earmarked for conclusion. So that is what I did. So that is something I wanted to share from experience.
So wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. So viewers, as you can see, the importance of structuring your answers is really paramount. And something I personally recommend in this is Prezi writing. It is the art and skill of writing large amounts of information, limited number of words. So kindly keep practicing that as you move forward. So Abhishek, any further points, or shall I move on to Simi for now?
I'm sorry for intruding.
No, not at all, not at all. That's the whole point of this interaction. It has to be open and frank and free amongst all the panelists. Thank you so much for your contributions and your views throughout.
My pleasure.
Yes, Simi. So could you also, in a capsule, explain to us what was the special ingredients of your preparation?
Thank you so much. I think a lot of points have already been covered, so I'll just highlight what were the challenges that I faced. So for me, the biggest paucity was that of time. Because I had so limited amount of time, all of the aspects of my preparation was getting filtered through it. So like he said rightly, I had a very good strong background for preparation. So I would suggest every aspirant to do that before diving right into the preparation. Also because towards the end, right, for example, between prelims and mains, you have to do a lot of studies, and that could go up to like 10 to 12 to 14 hours, and you should not burn out during that period. So if you start early, you might burn out right at the moment when you need to put in the maximum fuel. So coming to what I did, firstly, I kept my sources very limited. I would at max, I would keep one basic source and any extra value addition if I needed. I made my notes on Evernote, directly like he pointed out. I divided it into sections, GS paper wise, even for my optional, and I put all my notes in that. Another thing that I did was for prelims was that this I realized quite late was when I saw the previous year questions, I invested time to find out the actual original answer key from UPSC website. There are lots of different answers for the same question floating around, but you need to find out the thought process of the question maker, and that's what helped me, I think, to save you. Another thing, my notes were prepared according to the exam. So I was always having one introduction, the body part according to like for again the different dimensions, and then the conclusion. for a lot of topics, like the generic ones like agriculture, I already had prepared a set of introductions and conclusions. For example, doubling farmers' income by 2022. That automatically came to my mind when I see an agriculture question. Um, Another one thing that was different from Abhishek sir was I did start with the 11th question. I started with the 11th question, ended till the 20th, then went back to the first to 10th. That was, I think, why I did that was because I thought in 3 pages I could have, if I thought a little bit more, I could probably explain it better. But what I did was again to time my answers. I never exceeded the time limit for any question. So that was it. So basically, all the questions become balanced in that sense. But I started with the 11th question. Um, at the test center, my first focus was on completion of paper. Second focus was on completing as many questions as possible, applying the concepts that I have learned, and then just to have a sense of completion. So this is something that I've learned from a lot of seniors, that a lot of toppers don't complete their answers. So they think they'll write more perfect answers, but I think a perfect answer in this exam is a myth. So your first focus should be on completion and next on quality. For the interview process, some things that I focused on during the preparation was, I think this is a holistic personality test. They're not judging your knowledge. Throughout the process, something that I accept to all of the UPSC aspirants and even the people who've been selected is that I probably have a very small knowledge base as compared to the others. But I used to interlink my answers so very well that my limited knowledge got utilized effectively. In the interview, I was always trying to build a perspective on things. So if I'm reading the reservation issue, I will not read the factual information like what judgments have come out, what are the present dilemmas, but I would always try to build an opinion on that. So we can have a good formal conversation, and that helped in my interview. Another thing is, like you rightly pointed out, is try to bring in your personal experiences. I used to draw in experiences from my, for example, I had an internship at Japan. I used examples from that experience. I used examples from my experience at college, from my lived experience at Bhilai in Chhattisgarh. So I pointed out that, sir, in rural India, for example, in Chhattisgarh, there is the problem of tonhi, which is a witchcraft which is practiced. And then the next panel member picked that up from my answer. So they're always observing how you're presenting your answers and then picking up questions from that. So another thing also that they see is your presence of mind and how well you engage with them. It's not necessary that you will always be able to answer all the questions. There were some questions that even I could not answer, but I politely and humbly said that I'm sorry, sir, I'm not aware of it right now. I'll go back and read it. And they're very satisfied with that answer as well. Another experience that I would just briefly want to share during the interview was, there was a lady panel member and she gave an observation that I have visited IIT Bombay. There are just so many stray cows going around. It's such a mess. It's not a very good place to live in. I would not want to live there. How do you guys study there? And I felt that if I give a very pessimistic attitude, a pessimistic perspective to that, then they will pick it up in a wrong manner. And I don't really know a very positive answer about it either. So I thought to take it in a different direction. I said that, ma'am, actually there's a joke at IIT Bombay that we studied so hard for 2-3 years, prepared for JEE, and then came to this IIT Bombay. But the cows have had a free pass to this place. So that's a huge injustice. So that I think was a huge booster for energy for my interview, because the questions that followed were also different. So I think that way of sort of having a very formal but a sort of engaging conversation is important. These are some of the aspects from my preparation.
Thank you, Simi. It was very interesting to hear about your interview, also about how you politely said the truth. You did not try to bluff and you were straightforward and upright, but very politely, and how beautifully you were able to sidestep something that you felt could have landed you into trouble. Yes, Abhishek?
I would like to add to Simi's point. It's very true that you should not only draw on your personal experiences, but also, she said it's not about knowledge. I partially agree with that. It's you should show a consistency in your interview between what you have represented yourself as on the paper,
Yes,
and what you come off as in the interview. I have represented myself as a very academically inclined person, projects, internships, good CPI in college and all those things. So if you come off as an academically inclined person in the interview, that will help you. My hobby was also watching documentaries about structures. So I presented myself as a academically inclined person. Second thing, yes, it is not about knowledge. In fact, they will ask you very involved, very technical, very deep questions. It is not about your knowledge, it is about checking your honesty. Suppose if they ask you a question in interview, that will you be honest? Every person will say that I'll be honest. But if they ask you a question that is technical, in depth from your dad, and you think that no, I should answer the question. So what you do is you bluff. You give a wrong answer, which you don't even know what the answer for the question is. You give a wrong answer, and the board knows. So you're caught lying. So the tough question is about checking your knowledge, about checking your honesty, not about your knowledge. Even if you guess the right answer, it shows in your voice that you're bluffing. So the tough questions are about checking your knowledge, but the consistency that you show in the interview, that is between what you represent yourself on paper and what you come off as in the interview. That is very important. Secondly, I must completely agree with the point that Simi made about drawing from your life experiences. A question to me in the interview on 30th July, my interview was on 30th July. It was that you were in railways. So what experiences, what values can you bring from railways to civil service? That was a direct question in which I had to draw from my personal experiences. Second question was that you went to Canada, you went to USA, and you did research over there. So what was one thing from those countries that you want to bring to India? That was directly a question where I had to draw from my experiences. Third question was that how will you improve tourism in India digitally? So I had the opportunity to visit Statue of Liberty, and there they were giving headphones along with a player in which you can play various tracks and about the Statue of Liberty. So you don't have to be bound by the tour guide, and you can visit the site at your own freedom, at your own pace. So I picked that thing up and said that we could do this thing in India. And also, Railways is doing a virtual tourism project with Google, in which they will recreate the UNESCO World Heritage Sites of Railways digitally. And so that thing I had read when I was doing my training in Railways, I picked that up and used it in the interview. Point I'm trying to make is that you should come off as a humble, academically inclined, knowledgeable, honest person. That is what will help you, and very much true about engaging with the board. And in fact, on this tourism question, it became a conversation. We mentioned 3-4 points, and the honorable panelist was also picking up on that, and it really became a conversation. So I would completely support that.
Yes, and also I'll add over there, I think you come across somebody who is open to learning from his surroundings. You're seeing what's happening around you. That means you're self-aware and aware of your surroundings. That again, I'm sure, showed you in good light during your interview as well. So coming back to Simi, so few key points that I picked up from what you had said is number one, which again, all of which I really appreciate. I think very to the point, honest viewers, you must actually look at these key points that they're coming up with and telling you about. One is about focus sources. Restricting her sources, something which she was focused on. It's often joked that IAS aspirant raddi collector ban jate hain. So ये नहीं करना, as Simi is correctly saying, focus sources, she relied on them. Abhishek also said that he was sticking to the go-to resources throughout. Also, organized notes. Yes, very important, because organized notes reflect an organized mind. The easier they're to read for you, that means that your mind is processing it correctly, and secondly, you'll be able to revise better from it as well. Also, another thing which I really liked from what Simi said is she was writing her notes in a manner she would want to write an answer. I think another thing which most aspirants, mind you, end up struggling with is that they forget how to structure an answer in the whole process of learning knowledge. There's so much content that they can't put it into an introduction, body, and conclusion. And as Abhishek himself said that he struggled with it initially, and he found a way to overcome his weakness. And that's something which I highlighted right in the beginning of the session, that Abhishek is a person who overcomes his weaknesses at every stage, and Simi is one who was able to get it right by God's grace and by her own efforts from the get-go. So without taking any further time, I think we'll take up a few questions from the audience. We have very limited time left. So my dear fellow panelists, let's be brief with the answers. And to my dear viewers, if there are any questions that are left unanswered, kindly post them in the comments box later or email them to us. We'll try our best to reach out to the fellow panelists and get your questions answered and shared with you. If you have any other preparation related queries or anything Unique Shiksha or Unique Publishers can help you about, you can contact us later as well. So moving on to the questions, allow me a minute, I'll have to browse through them as we speak. So Swaroop sir, there's a question to you straight away from Mr. Sajid Hussain. So Sajid Hussain asks, Many civil servants face conflict between their own values and program neutrality. Please suggest a sustainable way out.
See, what you have to look at is if there is a clear cut government mandate about doing something, then your value should not come in the way, so to say. So, for example, clearly speaking, some people may have their values or their opinion about reservation. But the government is very clear in its mind that this has to happen. So you are heading an organization as a civil servant and you feel that there should be no reservation, but the government directive is that there should be reservation. Here, your personal value system cannot come in the way of what the government says. However, as I mentioned earlier, there is a lot of gray area where the government orders or even the law is not very clear. There you can have your value system determining how best you can live with your value system. But if there is a clear conflict between your value system and the orders of the government, if you want to continue as a civil servant, you jolly well follow the government order. Don't mess with it.
So, sir, in continuance to that sort of, there's another question again from Sajid Hussain himself. So, to what extent should bureaucrats use social media, if at all? Since presently there are no social media guidelines in this context, I see both the panelists also nodding their heads in agreement. I think that's a question they forgot to ask you. So, to what extent should bureaucrats use social media, if at all? Since presently there are no guidelines in this context. Recently, Gujarat DJP has taken initiatives. So, and of course, many other bureaucrats as well.
Let me attempt to answer this. This is brought out in a chapter in my book, Ethical Dilemmas of the Civil Servant, where I talk about the necessity of communicating with a large set of people using social media for communication. Now, when you do that, you have to be clear in your mind that you are not promoting yourself. Number one. Number two, you are not saying anything on the social media which contradicts or goes against the government stand policy. It is not that you should not be using social media. You can't avoid social media. Social media is a great way in which you can communicate to the world at large. I'll give you my own example. When I was coal secretary and there were coal auctions happening, how do you reach out to everyone? And at that point in time, I was not aware of Twitter. My son told me, why you picking up the phone and talking to everybody? I said, what do I do? He said, go to Twitter, announce a result. So for factual conveying of information, there can't be a better place than social media. Don't start coming up with opinions. There's a difference between conveying a factual information and conveying an opinion. You can obviously justify a decision that has been taken by you in social media, but for heaven's sake, don't criticize. So though there may not be written rules, but there is an unwritten or even written code of conduct. If you read the code of conduct, it is very clear. There, if you apply it to social media, you will know what you got to do, what you not got to do. But let me go beyond it. Not merely violating a particular code of conduct. What I'm saying is, social media cannot and should not be used for propagating yourself personally. I see a lot of officers these days, they go to some feta cutting occasion and they take a photograph. There is a meeting being held. Without giving the details of the meeting, they'll have a photograph of the meeting and that goes to social media. Social media is for a purpose. Purpose is information dissemination. Purpose is clarification if there is some confusion. Because communication is the key and social media can become a medium for communicating what ought to be communicated.
Right. Thank you, sir. So, Abhishek, I think you're a good person to answer the next question. It's from Prerna Singh. She says that she's a lecturer of English for banking and accessory services, preparing for civil services alongside. So, how can she strategize for UPSC 2021 while continuing her job? So, somebody who's working and preparing.
Like I mentioned, that it is going to be challenging. You will not have the luxury of waking up in the morning and devoting 3 hours to newspaper. Like Simi said, that you have to use 5-minute window to read one editorial, to read one column, mark it in the newspaper and transfer it to your notes in the evening. You have to use breaks. Like I mentioned that I studied in the toilet once. I studied in the train and I studied during the tea break that used to happen when we were doing a phase 1 course at TRISEN, that is a training academy in Pune. There was a 15-minute tea break, 11 to 11:15. I used to study during that. I used to carry my laptop around all the time. So that is something you have to do. Second thing is that you have to adapt. You have to be more amenable to digital technologies. You cannot carry all the copies all the time. So like Simi said, and I've also been making notes on Evernote. That is something you should do. Thirdly, that I would suggest that you should be upfront and open with the administration. You should be upfront and open with your bosses, so that you are able to avail study leaves during the means or the prelims, however you need. And you should be able to manage the expectations of your administration as well as your superiors, as well as your workload accordingly. And if at all your projects that you have been assigned to, they are not very favorable, then you can humbly request to be assigned to some other project, or you can switch jobs as well. I did that as well for the exam. But I would humbly advise every candidate to not make compromises on your job. Be upfront, be honest with the administration, and if it is not working for you, you can switch job, you can even leave job, but do not compromise on your job. That is something I would advise them, and be amenable to technology and adapt.
Thank you, Abhishek. So, Simi, you're a perfect candidate to answer this. Somebody who's done it herself. So, Pushkar Raj asks, is it possible to crack the exam in the first attempt itself? So, in a brief nutshell, if you could just give him your answer to that.
Thank you for the question. I think, like I have already discussed properly, that yes, it is doable. It is definitely doable in one go. What you need to do is first break down this myth that UPSC cannot be done in one attempt. Second, go to the syllabus, break it down. Don't see it as a one huge mountain, but try to break it down into smaller hills. Go to the lowest target, like your hourly preparation target, and the next moment think only about completing your smaller target. So as you work upon your smaller targets, you will get upon to building a bigger one. So another thing, use your time wisely, because that's something you will always have a paucity of. Use it creatively. So for example, even I used to use my social media very wisely. I was never disconnected from Facebook. I used to keep like the Hindu, Indian Express, ORF, those at the top of my feed. So even if I'm browsing, the first thing that comes to my mind is related to my preparation. So use your sources wisely, and always limit yourself to one path. Don't try to engage in too many directions. So a lot of questions that I'm hearing from my friends are, should I study this book or should I study that book? Just stick to one book and go with it. Don't go for perfection, go for completion. That's the key to it. That's it.
Thank you. So, thank you, Simi. So, Simi, I think there are quite a few other viewers also today who are going in for their first attempt. So, I think to a good extent, Simi has been able to cover her strategy earlier in the video and even now in the questions. So, I will not repeat the questions. So, viewers, I request you, once the session is over, you can always go back and view it again. And also, if you have any further questions which are unanswered, put them in the comments box, and I will personally try and reach out to Simi and request her very strongly to take out just a few minutes from a busy time and help us with the answers so that we can communicate them to you. So, due to the paucity of time, I'll move to the last question. Swaroop sir, this is directed to you from Sarika Maithani. Being an IR enthusiast, I want to pursue IFS. But what makes me curious is the fact that maximum aspirants never consider IFS as an option. What, according to you, is the reason behind it, sir?
First of all, I think both services are pretty good, very good, provide very interesting challenges. The choice of each individual is very personal. I think the apparent authority that comes with the IAS pushes people to adopt IAS, though they should not be the right one. But that's how life is, because they see IAS officers functioning in their real lives, and they see some of the IAS officers, or at least some of them, are able to influence the course of events here. The Foreign Service officers work elsewhere, and not many of us are fully conversant with what they do, though they also lead a very exciting life influencing international relations for the country. It's a very, very interesting service. I can tell you that the year that I joined, and before that, before 1980s, the top 20-25 people used to go to the Foreign Service. Now it has shifted over to the IAS. What I can make out is, earlier,
I think something has gone wrong with sir's network. So till the time sir doesn't come back, I'll tell you a little bit about my first interaction with civil servants. My first interaction was with an IFS officer. My family and I were traveling to Sri Lanka. Sir, sorry, your network had gone in the middle. So we
yes.
we missed a significant portion. Yeah, I think,
Power
sir. I think
outage.
from the time when you were saying,
Am I audible now?
yes, sir. From the time that you were saying that first, the top 25 people used to opt from for
Okay.
IFS. Soon after, it went away.
So what used to happen was before 1980, almost among the top 30 people, 20 used to opt for the foreign service. But then with the Kothari Commission report, the selection went to other places beyond Delhi, Bombay, and Allahabad. And there, I think in the interior areas, there is not so much awareness of the working of the foreign service. And they see in the rural areas and in interior areas, they see more of IS officers than their understanding of foreign service officers. And that could perhaps be the reason. There's no research in it. That's my perception. That could perhaps be the reason why people opt for the IS and not so much for the IS. But the services are both are wonderful services where you can influence. One is influencing international relations, and the other, of course, you're aware that within the country could do a lot.
Right. Thank you so much, sir, Simi and Abhishek, for taking out the time to be present in today's webinar. It was very enlightening, enriching even for me to interact with all of you and hear about all of your experiences. And sir, of course, it's a true honor to keep interacting with you on a regular basis. Again, to let you all know, Anil Swarup sir recently launched his second book with us, which is The Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant. Something I personally recommend very strongly to all aspirants to have a read and try and see how it helps you with the ethics paper, because it's full of case studies of sir's own life. And to young bureaucrats and upcoming bureaucrats like both of you, I do recommend reading the book also very strongly, because of course you'll understand how sir tackled all the obstacles and the challenges and the merits and demerits both of the service during his years. I'm sure it'll come in handy for both of you as well. And to the aspirants, any further questions that you have, please leave them in the comments box or reach out to us at Unique Publishers or Unique Shiksha. We're one organization, we'll help you with the preparation as well. So thank you so much for taking out the time today, and I wish all of you good health and a great career ahead, especially to both of you. Do stay in touch, and we would love to be able to meet in person once this entire fiasco is over. Thank you so much. Very nice to meet you all. Thank you.
Thank you, and God bless you, Abhishek and Simi. All the best in your career.
Thank you so much.
Stay in touch.